learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome, everyone. So today we're diving deep into the Kamakura period, a really transformative time in Japanese history.
Absolutely, a pivotal era.
We're going to explore how, the rise of the warrior class, the samurai, alongside the still influential aristocracy.
Yeah.
How that shaped everything.
Yeah, from literature to religion to art. It's fascinating.
It's a bit like a snapshot, maybe. A society really finding its feet again, changing, creating new kinds of expression, new beliefs.
Exactly. The Kamakura period, we're talking roughly late 12th to early 14th century. It's almost like this cultural pressure cooker.
Pressure cooker. I like that.
You've got the established court society, mainly around Kyoto, right? They'd been the center for ages. But then you have this really dynamic warrior class coming up, especially out east, around Kamakura itself.
And it's the mix, the sort of friction and fusion between those two that makes it so interesting.
Precisely. And you can see that so clearly in the literature.
Yeah, let's start there. After the Genpei Wars, which were just incredibly disruptive,
Huge upheaval.
there was a big push in the Kyoto area to, revive and maybe even refine those old courtly traditions. The Shinkoku Wakashu.
Ah, yes, the new collection of ancient and modern poems.
Spearheaded by retired Emperor Go-Toba. I mean, that was a massive effort.
It really was. And what's super interesting about that collection is this new aesthetic ideal that emerges, Yugen.
Yugen. It's hard to pin down, isn't it?
Very. It's not something you can just define in a sentence,
Yeah.
but think about that profound feeling, that subtle depth you might get looking at, say, mountains shrouded in mist.
Yeah.
It's a beauty that's more suggested, more hinted at than spelled out, deep, subtle, with this kind of lingering feeling.
Like the poem opens a door to crack, lets you glimpse something deeper, almost. Ineffable.
That's a good way to put it. And this period had some amazing poets who really captured that feeling. Segush, for example.
Oh, right. The warrior turned recluse.
Exactly. He basically leaves that life behind, wanders, and writes about his connection to nature in his Sankashu, the Mountain Home collection.
You can almost feel his personal journey in those poems.
Absolutely. Being both a warrior and then a monk gives his work such a unique viewpoint, a real sense of, life's transience.
And then there's Kama no Chome.
Ah, the Hujiki, an account of my hut. He lived through terrible times. War, famine, earthquakes.
Right.
And his essay captures that instability, that feeling of impermanence. It's incredibly powerful.
It really is. Still resonates today, that idea of trying to find some peace when everything's changing.
Definitely. And we can't forget Fujiwara no Teika.
The literary superstar, master of waka poetry, central to the Shinkoku Wakashu. His influence was just enormous, wasn't it?
Huge. Teika really defined poetic taste for generations. And, retired Emperor Go-Toba wasn't just funding this stuff.
He's a poet himself.
A skilled one, yes. He even wrote that poetry could govern the world and pacify the people. That's how important he thought it was.
Wow. Poetry as a tool for governing. That's quite a statement.
And it seems that idea even influenced Shogun Minamoto no Tsunotomo, who was also known as a poet. So art wasn't just decoration.
But while the court was refining its traditions, looking inward almost, the warriors were starting to tell their own stories, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. That's where the war tales, the Gunki Monogatari, come in. The prime example is the Heike Monogatari.
The tale, the hike. Epic stuff.
Totally. It's all about the Genpei War, glorifying samurai bravery, sacrifice, the whole warrior ethos.
And how did these stories get around? It wasn't like everyone could read scrolls back then.
That's the fascinating part. They were spread by biwahushi, these traveling, often blind priests who would chant the tales, accompanying themselves on the biwa lute.
Imagine hearing that. These dramatic stories performed live. Must have been captivating.
Definitely. It was performance art, really. And it helped spread the warrior ideals and build their sense of identity across the country.
Like their own legends being born and shared. And this growing confidence, this self-awareness.
Yeah.
It led to warriors getting more interested in learning, too.
Yes, we see evidence of that. Look at the Kanazawa Bunko Library.
Established by the Hiji clan, right, in Musashi province.
That's the one. A major library full of Japanese and Chinese texts. Think about that, a powerful warrior family investing heavily in scholarship.
That says a lot. It's not just about fighting anymore.
It shows a shift, a growing awareness of their place in history, maybe.
Yeah.
And you also see the Azun Kagami, the Mirror of the East.
A historical record.
Yeah, basically the official history of the shogunate, chronicling its founding and development. They were writing their own history.
So warriors looking forward, documenting their rise. But interestingly, you mentioned the aristocracy. Were they looking back?
In a way, yes. There seems to have been a kind of nostalgia, which led to this boom in Setsuo literature collections of anecdotes and
Like
tales.
the Uji Shui Monogatari.
Exactly. Collection of tales from Uji, gathering stories from earlier times, maybe looking back at a perceived golden age.
People often do that in times of big change, don't they?
It seems so. And this interest in the past also showed up in scholarship, like the detailed study of Yusoku Kujutsu.
Ancient court customs and etiquette.
Right. Studying and preserving those intricate rules, it provided a sense of continuity, maybe.
And with power shifting towards Kamakura in the east, people were traveling back and forth from Kyoto more. Did that create new kinds of writing?
It did. Travel literature, kikubun, becomes more prominent. People writing about their journeys between the old capital and the new shogunal center.
Any famous examples?
Sure, there's the Tukun Kiko, travels in the East Country, the Kaiduki, Record of the Sea Road, and maybe most famously, Abutsuni's Izayoi Nikki.
The 16-Night Moon Diary. That sounds quite personal.
It is. It gives you a much more intimate look at the journey, the feelings involved. So yeah, the literary scene is this really rich mix, tradition, innovation, reflecting all these societal shifts.
Okay, that's a great overview of the literature. Let's shift gears now. The Kamakura period is also huge for religion, right? These new Buddhist sects everyone talks about.
Absolutely. It's often seen as a major turning point for Japanese Buddhism.
What was going on? What sparked this religious transformation?
Well, a big part of it was the context. All that warfare, famine, instability towards the end of the Heian period.
Right, the background we talked about.
It led to this widespread feeling, this belief that the world had entered a degenerate age. It's called Mappu.
Mappu.
Yeah.
The idea that Buddhist teachings were in decline.
Exactly. And that achieving enlightenment through the old, established ways was becoming really, really difficult, maybe impossible for ordinary people.
That sounds pretty bleak.
It was. And that sense of anxiety, that feeling of Mappu, it wasn't just the peasants. It resonated across society, from nobles to warriors to commoners. It created a sort of spiritual hunger.
Fertile ground for new ideas, then.
Precisely. And into this environment stepped these really charismatic religious figures, offering new, more direct paths to salvation.
Okay, let's talk about him. Humnen, founder of Yudoshu Pure Land Buddhism. Where does he fit in?
Hunin came from a family with warrior connections, actually. His big thing was Senju Nenbutsu.
Meaning?
Exclusive recitation of the Nenbutsu. That's the phrase. Namu Amida Butsu. Hail to Amida Buddha.
Just saying that phrase.
With sincere faith, yes. Hunin taught that simply by trusting in Amida Buddha's compassion and reciting his name, anyone, literally anyone, regardless of status or past actions, could be reborn in Amida's Pure Land after death.
Wow, that's incredibly accessible compared to complex rituals or deep meditation.
Exactly. No need for extensive study or monastic discipline, just faith and recitation. In a time of chaos, that message of universal salvation was incredibly powerful and spread rapidly, especially after the Genpei War.
It offered hope, a direct line. And Honen had a famous disciple, Shinran, who started Judo Shinshu, true Pure Land Buddhism. Did he take it further?
He did. Shinran, though he was born an aristocrat, pushed the idea of reliance on Amida even more radically. He taught that absolute faith, just pure trust in Amida, was the only thing necessary.
More radical how?
Well, he came up with this concept of akunin-shuki.
Ikunishuki, what's that?
It basically means that evil or sinful people are the very ones Amida most wants to save.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Shinran's logic was, well, if you recognize how truly incapable you are of saving yourself through your own efforts, if you know you're burdened by desires and failings, then you're precisely the kind of person who will throw yourself completely on Amida's mercy. Absolute reliance born from recognizing your own limitations.
That's counterintuitive, but I kind of see the logic. Trusting because you know you can't do it yourself.
Exactly. And Shinran lived this out. He was exiled for a time, spread his teachings among farmers out east.
And he also did some pretty unconventional things for a priest back then, right?
Oh, yeah. He openly married, ate meat. Things that flew in the face of traditional monastic rules.
That must have caused a stir.
A huge stir. But it reflected this changing world, maybe blurring the lines between monks and lay people. And it certainly made his teachings relatable to ordinary folk living ordinary lives.
Okay, so Hunen and Shinran focused on the Nembutsu and Amida's grace. What about Ippon, founder of the Jishu?
Ipin, another figure with warrior roots, he was much more of a traveling evangelist, very active, very engaging.
Also,
He journeyed all over Japan, handing out fuda paper slips or charms with a Nembutsu written on them.
okay.
And he popularized the Odori Nembutsu.
Odori, like dancing.
Yeah, dancing Nembutsu. Imagine groups of people chanting Amida's name, dancing together, this sort of ecstatic, communal expression of faith that must have had incredible energy.
Definitely sounds different from quiet temple rituals.
Very. So these Nembutsu-based schools, Judo-shu, Judo-shinshu, Jishu, they really resonated with commoners, with warriors, people who maybe didn't have wealth or literacy or time for complex practices. They relied on tariki, other power, the power of Amida Buddha. But the Kamakura period also saw the rise of Zen Buddhism, which took a totally different approach, emphasizing jiriki.
Jiriki, self-power.
Exactly. Your own effort, your own innate potential for enlightenment. The key figures introducing Zen were Eisai and Dagon.
Eisai traveled to China, right? Song China.
Right.
And brought back Rinzai Zen.
That's right. Rinzai Zen focuses on achieving enlightenment, satori, through things like zazen seated meditation and also working with Kan, those paradoxical riddles. It's a very direct experiential path.
And the shogunate liked Zen.
Yes, Eisai gained patronage from the Kamakura shogunate. The discipline, the mental focus, the emphasis on self-reliance in Zen, it seemed to appeal to samurai mentality.
That makes sense. And Dogen.
Dogen also studied in China and founded the Suchi school of Zen in Japan. He put an even stronger emphasis on Zazen. For Dogen, seated meditation wasn't just a tool to get enlightenment, it was the practice of enlightenment itself, just sitting.
Just sitting as enlightenment.
Yeah.
That's profound.
It is. And the shogunate continued to support Zen, inviting prominent Chinese Zen masters over, establishing major temples in Kamakura itself, like Kenshuji and Ungakuji.
So Zen really found a home with a warrior class and the new government center. It fit their spirit, and maybe also this openness to new things from the continent.
I think so. It aligned well. And then finally, in this wave of new Buddhism, we have Nichiren.
Founder of Hokushu, or Nichiren Buddhism. He came from a different background again, didn't he?
Yeah, quite humble origins. A fishing village in the Kanto region. His teaching was intensely focused on one scripture, the Lotus Sutra.
A Lotus Sutra, what was his practice?
Reciting the Daimoku. That's the phrase. Namumi Shurenchuki. Hail to the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law. Nichiren believed this was the essential practice for the age of Mapu, the key to happiness not just for individuals, but for the entire nation.
He sounds quite forceful. Was he accepted?
He was very assertive, often critical of other Buddhist schools and the government. He faced a lot of opposition, even got exiled by the shogunate twice. But despite that, or maybe because of his conviction, his teachings gained a strong following, especially among samurai in the Kanto region.
So all these different figures, different paths, Pure Land, Zen, Nichiren, it's quite a diverse landscape. Is there any common thread besides emerging in the same era?
Well, what's really striking is that all these founders, Hunden, Shinran, Eisai Dogen, Nichiren, they all initially studied at Enryakuji on Mount Hai.
The big center for Tendai Buddhism, the establishment, basically.
Exactly. They all came out of that older, broader Tendai tradition. But each of them ultimately decided to focus on one specific practice, one single path they believed was most effective for their time, whether it was the Nembutsu or Zazen or the Daimoku.
So simplifying things, maybe. Making Buddhism more accessible or direct for a wider range of people.
That seems to be a key aspect, yes. Diverging from the more comprehensive, sometimes complex scope of the older schools.
But what were those older schools doing? Did they just fade away?
Not at all. They weren't passive. You had monks like Jukei from the Haas school or Minja from the Kigun school working hard to revitalize their own traditions, re-emphasizing precepts and scholarship.
So internal reforms, too.
Yes. And figures like Eisen and Ninshu, who were part of the Ritsu school, which focused on monastic discipline, they got heavily involved in social welfare. Helping the poor, caring for the sick, building bridges and roads, engaging with society's problems in a very practical, compassionate way, which in some ways echoed the community focus of some of the new movements.
So adaptation and action from the established schools as well. And what about non-Buddhist traditions? Any changes there?
Yes, Shugenju, that blend of mountain asceticism, ancient shamanistic beliefs, and Buddhist influences, it continued to grow in importance.
Right, the mountain hermits.
And within Shinto, Japan's indigenous faith, there was intellectual development too. At the Great Ice Shrine, a priest from the outer shrine, Watarai Iyuki, developed a more systematic theology, leading to what's called Issa Shinto.
So religious ferment Across the board, really.
Yeah,
Not just Buddhism.
absolutely. A period of intense spiritual searching and innovation.
Okay, so these new Buddhist movements are spreading. How did they actually organize themselves? Did they become, established sects with structures?
It was a gradual process, and it varied from group to group. It wasn't like they instantly formed rigid organizations. Honen, for instance, was incredibly charismatic. He attracted followers from everywhere. Despite persecution at times, his judo shu started to coalesce, with Chionin in Kyoto becoming a central point.
And Shinran, you said he didn't focus on organization much himself.
Not during his lifetime, no. He was more focused on teaching in the Kanto region. But his followers kept the flame alive. It was actually his great-grandson, Kakunyo, much later in the Kamakura period, who really worked to unify the Judo Shinshu movement.
Ah, so it took a few generations.
Yeah. Kakunyo asserted the authority of Honganji Temple in Kyoto and laid the groundwork for Judo Shinshu to become this massive, powerful organization later in the Muromachi period.
What about Ipin and his dancing followers?
Ipin himself didn't seem to intend to build a formal sect, but after his death, his disciple Shinki started establishing doju, these training or practice halls in different places. That was kind of the beginning of the Jishu becoming more institutionalized.
And the Zen schools, Rinzai and Sushu.
Rinzai Zen tended to spread through individual temple lines. Aizei founded temples, Chinese masters invited by the shogunate founded temples, and each developed its own lineage, its own network.
Less centralized, maybe.
Initially, perhaps. Within Suchu Zen, after Dugan died, there was actually some debate among his successors. Should they focus strictly on intensive zazen like Dujin, or put more effort into spreading the teachings more widely?
A common tension, I suppose, practice versus propagation.
Exactly. But even Dujin's main temple, Iheiji, which started out very strict, gradually adapted its approach. So Suchizen also developed its organizational structure over time.
And Nichiren, after all that opposition.
His following actually grew, especially after his exiles. He inspired fierce loyalty. After his death, there were some internal disputes among his main disciples about leadership and interpretation.
Happens a lot.
It does. But the core teachings were there, the followers were there, and the foundations for the Nichiren Shu as a distinct sect were definitely laid during the late Kamakura period.
So it sounds like the mid-Kamakura period onwards was really key for these new movements starting to build lasting structures, each in their own way.
That's a good summary. It was a gradual evolution from charismatic founders and initial enthusiasm to more formalized religious organizations.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's turn to the arts. How did all this societal change, this religious energy, show up in what people were creating?
We see some really dramatic developments in art and architecture, too. A big catalyst was actually destruction.
Destruction.
Yeah, the Jinpei War. Remember, major temples in Nar, like the famous Tudaiji, were badly damaged or destroyed in the fighting.
Oh, right, including the Great Buddha.
Yes. So a massive reconstruction effort was needed. This was spearheaded by a monk named Shugen, rebuilding Tudaiji's Great Buddha Hall, the Great Buddha statue itself, the huge non-diamond gate. It was a colossal project.
Must have required immense resources. And new ideas.
Definitely new ideas. Shugen brought in a powerful new architectural style from Song China. It's called the Great Buddha style, or Daibutsuyu. Very bold, structural, quite different from the earlier Japanese styles.
And he worked with sculptors.
Yes, crucially, he collaborated with the incredibly talented sculptors at the Kai School. Names like Unkei, Kukei, and Kaikei are legendary.
Onkei and Kaikei. Their statues are amazing.
Yeah, they are. Think about the Kongarakishi guardian figures at Tudaiji's non-diamond gate. That pair of huge, muscular, dynamic statues.
Yeah, they look so fierce, so alive.
Exactly. That's a joint work by Unkei and Kaikei, and it perfectly embodies this new energy, this powerful realism that characterizes Kamakura's sculpture. It's a real departure from the more serene, high-end style.
Realism seems to be a key word here.
It is, and this connection with China continued. By the mid-Kamakura period, maritime trade was flourishing. This brought more influences, including another architectural style associated with Zen Buddhism.
The Zen style.
Zanshu.
That's the one. It arrived along with influential Chinese Zen monks like Ranke Duju and Mugaku Sogen, who came to lead the new Zen temples being built, especially in Kamakura.
How does the Zen style look?
It's quite different from the Great Buddha style. More refined, maybe. Characterized by rational design, precise joinery, a sense of orderly beauty. very suited to the disciplined atmosphere of a Zen monastery.
So two distinct new styles coming in from China. Did they stay separate?
Not entirely. Over time, architects started blending elements. You get this eclectic style called setshu.
A mix and match.
Kind of. It combines features of the traditional Japanese style, the way which itself was a Sinicized style developed in the Heian period, known for its elegance,
Right.
with the boldness of the Daibutsuyu and the precision of the Zenshuyu, creating something new again.
It's interesting how the names for these styles evolved too. You mentioned they weren't always called Daibutsu-yu and Zenshu-yu.
Right. Initially, the Great Buddhist style was sometimes called Tenjiku-yu, meaning Indian style, which was inaccurate, so that changed. And the Zen style was sometimes called Kara-yu, Tang style, which was also misleading since it was contemporary Song Chinese, not Tang, and specifically linked to Zen, so the names became more precise over time.
Okay. So architecture and sculpture embracing realism and new continental styles. Did painting follow suit?
Yes, realism becomes much more prominent in painting as well, especially in imakemono, those narrative hand scrolls.
Ah, the picture scrolls. What do they depict?
All sorts of things, vivid scenes of contemporary life. The Ippen Shinen Eden, for instance, is an incredible illustrated biography of the wandering holy man Ippen we talked about earlier, full of detail about places and people.
So religious stories, but grounded in reality.
Yes. And then you have scrolls depicting warriors and battles, like the Otoko Imaki, Scroll of Men, or the Mukoshirai Ekotoba, the famous scroll showing the Mongol invasions. These are dynamic, action-packed, sometimes quite graphic.
Bringing history and legend to life visually.
Exactly. And realism also surged in portraiture, which is called naisi.
Nice likeness pictures.
Right. Early Kamakura artists like Fujiwara Takanobu and his son Goryen were masters of this. They moved away from idealized or stylized faces towards creating really convincing, psychologically penetrating portraits of actual people, including courtiers and warriors capturing individuality.
A real focus on the human element.
Definitely. And finally, we can't forget the crafts. With the rise of the warrior class, what do you think became really important?
Weapons.
Armor.
Exactly. Sword making reached an incredible peak. Smiths like Osafu Nakamitsu, Awadaguchi Yoshimitsu, Okazaki Masamune, their names are legendary. Their swords weren't just functional, they were, and are, considered supreme works of art. Incredible skill.
The Japanese sword is art. Absolutely. And influence from imported Chinese goods from the Song and Yuan dynasties was also felt in things like calligraphy. A new style called the Shurinen style developed, building on Heian traditions, but with new influences. And pottery production really took off in various regions too, with Sado ware from Owari province becoming particularly famous.
So across the board in the arts, architecture, sculpture, painting, crafts, we see this embrace of realism, energy, new techniques blending with old, all reflecting the dynamism of the Kamakura period itself.
That sums it up perfectly. It was a time when Japanese culture was being reshaped from multiple angles, leading to these incredibly rich and lasting innovations.
So wrapping this up, it's clear the Kamakura period wasn't just about political shifts and warfare. It was profoundly dynamic culturally.
Absolutely. You have this fascinating interplay, don't you, between the established traditions, especially of the court, and the raw energy of this rising warrior class, plus influences from the common people and the continent.
And that mix led to, well, amazing developments. New literary forms and aesthetics, like Yugen and the War Tales.
New forms of Buddhism that offered direct paths to salvation or enlightenment, resonating with far more people.
And this powerful wave of realism and new styles in art and architecture, it really changed the face of Japanese culture.
It truly did. It laid the foundations for so much that came later.
Here's something to maybe think about.
Yeah.
What can exploring this period, the Kamakura cultural shifts, tell us about how society works more broadly?
That's a great question.
I mean, how do changes in who holds power or the emergence of new social groups influence what a society values, what stories it tells, how it seeks meaning, how it expresses itself creatively?
It suggests that culture isn't static, right? It's constantly being negotiated and reshaped by these forces. New ideas, new people, new challenges. They force a society to adapt, to blend the old and new.
Yeah. You see both continuity, they didn't just throw everything out, but also these really radical departures. The Kamakura period feels like a perfect example of a society redefining itself through its culture, its literature, its faith, its art.
It really is a rich case study in cultural transformation.
We really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and maybe encourages you to look even closer at this incredibly vibrant and pivotal era in Japanese history.